thank you to him as well for being live with us on what Antonio Costa, the President of the EU Council, said today was literally the most important day on the Brussels map for that topic of EU enlargement. And now it is time to focus on a country whose fate is very linked, in fact, to Ukraine, on Moldova, submitted the candidacy back in 2022, and we're thrilled to have President Maia Sandu with us here physically in Brussels. Come up on the stage. You'll be sitting down with Euronews's EU editor, that's Maria Tadeo. So a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks. Well, thank you very much. And welcome to the Europe Conversation. My guest today is Moldova's President, Maia Sandu. Thank you very much for being with us on Euronews. Of course, when you run for the election, and you clearly won that election in very difficult circumstances, a choice was very clear. Whoever voted for Maia Sandu was voting for Europe, and it was voting to join the European Union. The obvious question may be, perhaps it seems obvious to you, but why is this such an existential question for your country?
Well, first of all, because Moldova wants to continue to be a democratic country, wants to be part of the free world. And of course, because of the security threats that we have been experiencing, because of the hybrid war that we have been experiencing, especially since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So because we want to be part of the free world, and the membership of EU would allow us to achieve that.
One of the questions, obviously, when it comes to enlargement is that you wish to join, the EU wants to take you in, but there's hurdles in between, and that can get extended, and it becomes very difficult. What is the concern for you if this process doesn't move fast enough? Because I'm sure you think about this at night.
Well, of course, the first question is for us, because we have now an excellent political opportunity. We have significant popular support, but also we have significant commitment in all state institutions to implement the EU reforms, and it would be a pity to lose this time. But also, you know, we won the battle this time at the previous 3 elections, but it doesn't mean that Russia is going to give up on Moldova. And if we want more security in the region, if we want more security for Europe, but also for Ukraine, we need to make sure that we don't lose time in Moldova and we consolidate our country and our democracy.
So to put this in very crude terms, if you don't join the European Union, do you believe there is a threat to the sovereignty of your country? And ultimately, this leaves you totally at the mercy of Russia.
Of course. You know, it's not easy. We have, in the last 12 months, we had 2 national elections and a referendum, and we have seen an unprecedented influence, external influence from Russia. It was not easy for us to deal with so many challenges, but we knew that Europe is helping us, is next to us, and that we have an objective to become a EU member state. If we don't deliver in the next 3 years, we have the presidential elections in 3 years and then parliamentary elections, then what's going to be the message to the people? Because you might have the situation that the government has delivered, and we have seen even in today's report, I haven't seen the report, but I've seen some statements, including by Commissioner Kos, that Moldova did manage to show significant progress. So if you deliver at home, but you don't see progress on behalf of EU, then, of course, this creates significant risks for Moldova and for the rest of the countries in the region.
And you mentioned the report that was put out by the European Commission with the recommendations, of course. They say that you're making huge progress, again, in difficult circumstances, and they also say you're ready to open all clusters in November. The obvious question is, why has this not been done before? It's almost the end of the year.
That's a question to the EU. We have been ready since February to open the negotiations on the first cluster, and now EU says that we can open all the clusters. And I do understand that there are all kinds of solutions, but EU also needs to have a timetable to take a decision, a deadline to take a decision on this. Otherwise, they can discuss, you know, for a long time.
And I have to ask you a follow-up question, because some believe, of course, in Brussels, that the concern is not so much Moldova, the issue, but is Ukraine. And many look at the Moldovan bid and the Ukrainian bid as joint bids, as twins. You applied almost at the same time. Is that how you see it?
Well, the documents say that it's a merit-based approach, and we do believe in a merit-based approach, and it should be both for Moldova and Ukraine and for the rest of the countries. As we could see in the reports, both countries are ready to move to the next steps. So it's now really up to the EU to adopt a decision and to move forward.
And on that point, however, of course, is the elephant in the room in Brussels. Just a final point on this. The issue with the clusters and the negotiation is because, in a way, Moldova is now in the cross battle between Ukraine and Hungary. There's a veto along the way. Many look at it as a joint bid. The two need to move together, but Ukraine has serious problems now moving forward because of this veto. Is there a way that this can be solved? Is there an overcoming? Would you be okay with that?
There are solutions, but again, these are to be taken by the EU member states and by the EU institutions. It's not easy, but if the EU is a little bit more creative and if EU wants to solve this issue, I'm sure it can solve it.
And then, of course, we have to talk briefly about the election campaign, because what happened in your country, and it has been documented, it's an unprecedented interference in an election. Now that there's been time to settle after the election took place, what is the sense that you perceive? What are the threats that you see moving on forward? And again, is there something that you learned from this campaign and this election, which I repeat, it's not the only one, but again, it put the focus on there is interference going on in European elections?
Well, it's easy in Moldova to see Russia's interference because it's been brutal and most of the citizens have seen it. There were many dimensions, of course, the disinformation and manipulation and trying to threat the people with the war that if you vote for EU, then what is happening today to Ukraine is going to happen to you. Attempts to discredit the Moldovan state and the Moldovan authorities. Attempts to organize violent protests, the illegal financing of political parties and campaigns, and even attempts to buy votes. So the influence was so brutal that everybody could see it. In other countries, in EU countries, of course, Russia cannot do all the things that it is doing in Moldova, but the influence can be also very damaging, and for the people not to see it, because when it's about manipulation of information and disinformation, it's much more difficult to see it. In our case, what helped, and we have learned the lesson of last year's elections, was prevention and exposure. The state institutions worked very hard to follow the money from January 1st until the day of the elections, to sanction those who were using Russian money in the elections to finance political parties, their campaigns, or attempts to buy votes. Also, the independent media in Moldova did a very good job by exposing how Russia was hiring people for their troll farms and how they were producing this disinformation content and distributing it. So it was a whole of society effort, but again, it was easier for us to make people aware of these risks, and then people knew that what was at stake. It's more difficult in countries where this influence by Russia is not that brutal.
And President, of course, with all due respect, many would say this is not really new. This back from the Soviet playbook. If there's a way to interfere, they would try to do that. The issue now, and perhaps why it's magnified, it's because the West is not being strong enough. In your view, is the West being weak? Is there an issue with the leadership?
Well, I do believe that for a long time EU didn't take seriously Russia's danger. And I do believe that now the biggest problem is with the online disinformation, because we do have regulations of the audiovisual, but what happens online, and I'm talking about the inauthentic accounts, what is not genuine people's views, what is amplified, again, with money coming from Russia. This is the most damaging part, and I think everybody should take it seriously.
Can I ask a question which was not really at all something that I planned on asking, but now that you mentioned the digital and the things that you see on social media, I remember the Vice President of the United States said, if your democracy can be unsettled by a bunch of TikToks, maybe it's that your democracy is not that strong at all. He said that at the Munich Security Conference. Is that something that you think is fair, or you go, actually, no, what we're seeing now, it's unprecedented. You've never seen a country like Moldova, small country, dealing with this amount of pressure.
Again, when this is genuine, when it's a genuine dialogue of people online, that's one thing. But in Moldova, we had like an example when BBC infiltrated one of these troll farms, and they accounted for 100 accounts on TikTok, which distributed videos which reached 55 million, or there were 55 million views in a country of 2.4 million people. So I'm talking about inauthentic account and amplified content using illegal money. This is where we need to look into, because this has nothing to do with democracy.
And I want to go back into the specifics of the process of enlargement, because the Commission is saying, and for some, this is basically around the corner, 2028, you blink and we'll be in that year. You're ready to close the negotiations. You could be in a position to do that. But how do you do that so fast in 2 years when we've seen the real difficulties? I mean, we're in November. The clusters are not really moving. How is that going to change in the next 2 years?
Well, we have shown that we are ready and we can do a lot of work in a short period of time. And we are very committed, and we understand that there is a lot that we still need to do. But we also want to see the same determination on the part of the EU to find the solutions. In the past, EU, every time the enlargement was happening, EU had to come up with unorthodox decisions, and they've managed to do it. So it's really about the creativity, but also of the commitment of the EU to find the solutions.
You know, that's a perfect segue, because there's a big debate around the idea of unanimity. Unanimity, obviously, in this process is absolutely clear and needed. No country will join if the 27 don't agree. But there's a debate introduced by the head of the European Council, who said maybe some parts could be unanimous, maybe others just require majority. When you look at unanimity, is that something that you think the EU could get creative?
Yes, I believe it should get creative, and I do believe that it's not easy with the internal reforms, but these are not the first internal reforms of the EU. It has managed to do them in the past because it wanted, so I'm sure that it can find solutions now as well. It's in the interest of EU as well. You cannot allow for some dozen countries to be used by authoritarian regimes against the EU, because this is what's going to happen if there is not going to be a real perspective for the EU integration for those who are working hard to meet the EU standards.
Do they understand that? Because I know you've said we need now from now on clarity, but also engagement. Do they understand that? Or they go, obviously you're lobbying for your country, you have to say that.
Well, we've been talking, and I'm using my time here in Brussels, of course, to talk to member countries, but also to EU officials to find solutions.
Do you think something around this could change in the next few months? I know it's a difficult question, but did they give you an...
I really hope this is going to happen. We need solutions in the next few months.
And did they give you an indication, however, when it comes to unanimity, the clusters, how to move forward? It's different to wish to an indication. Was there an indication?
Well, we will continue to push for clear solutions and clear deadlines for the solutions to be enforced.
And then I want to go into some of the reforms, because they also say, obviously, there needs to be reforms, internal reforms, which are those that you allude to, unanimity and how to work within the EU, but also the external reforms. And when it comes to Moldova, they also say there are ways in your economy that you need to open up. It needs to be much more transparent. I know there's a conversation about there's Soviet practices that still remain and they're difficult to erase. What do you think is the biggest problem? And also, what do you say to Europeans who go, I know very little about these countries. What I hear is not very positive. Why should they join?
Well, I just said why we should join, because if you don't support us to stay a democratic country and participate to the stability and security in the region, then we're going to be used by Russia and are going to be used against Ukraine and the EU countries in the region. We do have important reforms to implement. Justice sector reform is one of the reforms, which is not easy, but we have made progress, especially with the external extraordinary evaluation of judges and prosecutors, which is about integrity of judges and prosecutors. We have made progress in fighting corruption, and also the Moldovan people can see the first results. So we should continue with this reform. It's not easy. We have made significant progress in the energy sector. 4 years ago, we were 100% dependent on Russian gas. Today, we don't consume any Russian gas, with the exception of Transnistrian region. We are going to finish by the end of this month the first high-voltage electricity connection line with Romania, which is going to connect us directly to the EU market. And talking about timetable, I can give you examples when EU kept telling us that we need several years to connect to ENTSO-E, and then when the war started, we connected to ENTSO-E in just 1 week. I can give you example when EU would tell you that to have an agreement with Frontex, you need a year. We managed to sign an agreement with Frontex in 1 week. So when EU institutions want this, they can make it happen very quickly.
And just going back to Moldova and again going up to the economy, one of the points that is also made is that the economy needs to get much stronger to be on an equal footing to the rest. Yours is a country obviously by GDP that ranks the lowest among, Europe and maybe would be EU members. How do you see that evolving? Because as it stands and going back to the European population, they can go and say, we're just too different. The numbers show that.
Well, first of all, the Moldovan economy has been affected significantly by the war. It's difficult to attract investors when you have the war next door. And of course, there is also the demographics. 1/3 of Moldovan population is abroad, and most of these people are in the EU countries. They're already contributing here and paying taxes. 1/3 of the Moldovan population has already EU passports. So, you know, we are almost there. We just need to make it official. Of course, we have to improve our economic situation. We are working hard. We're improving the business environment. But given the war in Ukraine, it's not going to be that easy for us to make miracles in the next few years. But with support from EU, we have been able to maintain the living standards. And now, after these elections, we do have higher chances to bring Moldovans back, but also to bring more investments.
And as you mentioned, the war in Ukraine obviously had an impact on your country. It also had an impact on all of the European countries and the EU countries through energy. But I wonder specifically, when you look at your process, do you go, we are conditioned to some extent by the war. If the war in Ukraine does not end in the next 3 years, does that have an impact on the material progress you can make? Because some would argue the uncertainty remains.
Yes, that's true. The uncertainty remains, but it doesn't mean that we cannot improve our economic situation. Some of the investors will not come to Moldova, but some are already coming. And this is also a contribution or the result of the policies that we have been implementing.
So in any way, you don't think if this war continues, and of course it's very difficult to put a date on it, no one knows when this war will end or how, you don't see a way that this can destabilize your bid? You think that you can stay on your track even if all of this is happening?
Well, of course, we are very grateful to the Ukrainian people and to the countries which support Ukraine, and this is one of the conditions for Ukraine to resist and for the EU and the democratic world to continue to support Ukraine. Otherwise, the war, of course, continues to be a threat to Moldova and not only to Moldova.
And just lastly, of course, you will be meeting with different European officials. Obviously, this report has come out. A lot of the work will now be dictated by a timeline. We've talked about what they demand of you, but I wonder in your conversations, what is it that you will be asking from them in priorities 1, 2, 3 that can be done over the next year? So specific matters that can move.
Well, for now, it's opening the negotiations on all the clusters, as they have said in the report that we are ready. So this is what should happen.
President, would you consider that a failure of the EU before the end of the year? They promised a lot.
I don't want to think about failures. I want to believe that by the end of this year, the EU is going to find solutions.
For all of the clusters?
For all the clusters.
And then lastly, just when you look at next year, if you just go in an order of priorities, this is what we would like to see. What is it that you will be asking? And not just general ideas, but just specific things that you say, when we need engagement, what does that mean practically? Is it more meetings? Is it delegations go in there? Is it more dialogue, direct dialogue?
No, we really need to now sit and work. We need to get the closing benchmarks from the EU, and these closing benchmarks need to be agreed by all the member states, so that we could work very seriously in the next 2 years on meeting these closing benchmarks. And of course, the support that we might need for some of the reforms based on the agreements we're going to make.
And just lastly, when you look at 2030, maybe even 2035, what do you see?
Well, in 2030, I see Moldova part of the EU.
Well, President, thank you very much for joining us. And of course, that was Maia Sandu, my guest in this Europe conversation.
you so much, Maria Tadeo, for that. And thank you, President Maia